This is Matthew with CJSF Radio 90.1 FM. I am doing an interview with Boxi Yang of the Conference Board of Canada. And we're going to talk about a recent op-ed that she wrote for the Globe and Mail, where she discussed a little bit of the educational issues going on, particularly with regard to higher education. Thank you so much for joining us, Boshi.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, so the first thing that I want to ask you about is in your article, you talk about how, and I quote here, for every public dollar spent training a trade student, governments recoup roughly $9 in future tax revenue, and for a computer science degree, returns about 6 to 1. So I think that that's a good place for us to start talking about the economic concept of externality, as I think it might help some of our audience members kind of think about and understand what you're saying. Because in some ways, as I was reading this, it seemed like you are seeing almost a negative externality in the way that people are going into certain degrees and certain field choices. Is that kind of true?
I wouldn't coin it as the negative externality. So basically, the whole piece of that op-ed is coined in the term ROI, which is return on investment. And typically, when we talk about return on investment, I'm sure our business graduates or business students have a better idea of what that means. But basically, it means if I invest in $1, how much would I get back in return, right? So it's a business term. In this context, though, this is the first of its kind research in Canada that does the return on investment research on higher education. And what I meant is that from a fiscal perspective, because our higher education system, a lot of the revenue for SFU, for UBC, for all of these universities and colleges are invested by provincial government, right? So when provincial government is trying to put their physical like funding into post-secondary education, a question that they might ask is, okay, so if I give you this bunch of money, what kind of value do I get, right? Is this a kind of a cost or is it kind of an investment, right? So basically, our research finds that actually the return on this public investment in higher education is quite high. And although it's quite a robust public investment overall, like you said, the returns actually vary very sharply by fields and credentials. And like you said, like when it comes to skilled trades and engineering and STEM major, and in a lot of cases in healthcare major, this return on investment is quite high because the labor market needs a lot of these talent, skilled talent, and they pay them well. And when the graduates earn more income in their future, like after they graduated from their training, over a lifetime, that's a lot of tax payable that's going back to the provincial and federal government. And that's how we calculated or estimated the ROI. But like you said, comparatively, there are some majors or field of studies that doesn't have as high in ROI as these fields, high demand field that I just talked about. And that could be like humanities, social science, education, so on and so forth. So yeah, like you said, the returns vary very sharply across different fields of study.
That's totally fair. So I'm curious then, do you think that changing the relative costs of these educational fields would be useful? So for instance, do you think policymakers should increase the cost of less in-demand degrees, like you mentioned, social sciences, and then use that to subsidize some of the more desired and in-demand degrees and trades through maybe a transfer?
Like if by cost you mean the tuition, I'm not too sure. I think that there's a tuition cap on almost every field of study. And I feel like it's kind of unfair for students who really love these majors. For example, if someone's really passionate about some social science or humanity majors, it's kind of unfair for them to bear the cost of this low ROI, outcome. But I do think from this research, we concluded that there might be something that the government could do to kind of incentivize
Hmm.
students or incentivize our post-secondary education to focus more on fields that provides higher yield and align better with labor market needs. For
Right.
example, they can align their allocation of fundings because right now the provincial funding for universities and colleges, a lot of it is based on enrollment. Right, enrollment numbers. And I'm sure you know that in SFU, a lot of students are enrolled in these big programs like social sciences or business or like humanities, so on and so forth, right? So a lot of the funding is based on enrollment numbers. So if you have a bigger enrollment in this program or in this study, then we'll allocate you with more funds because I mean it's kind of intuitive. You need because of the student base that you have, you need more money to operate, right? So
Yeah.
operate fundings rely a lot on enrollment. But what we're suggesting is that maybe we can tie some of the transfers to performance metrics, such
Right.
as, graduate enrollment, employment, or future earnings of their graduates, or at least like co-op participation.
Okay.
So when we reward these measurable outcomes for graduates, that kind of creates an incentives for the school and for the students to move into fields that we just talked about that
Right.
has higher demand in the labor market.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Because you also mentioned in the article, you say our funding rewards volume, not alignment. So I'm
Yeah.
now curious, like, do you think that there are certain social or cultural factors that kind of impact this? One of the things that comes to my mind is that for the past at least 2 decades, most people have been told you need a degree to succeed. And I wonder if that, in your mind at least, depresses some of the trades and enrollment.
No, definitely. I think you're right on spot there that cultural values from the students, from the demand side, also motivates the school to expand those programs that we just talked about. I mean, like there are a lot of people who love to study, more in social science and humanities, and that's, fair enough because I understand. I major in economics, which is, part of the social science
Hmm.
field because it's more relatable, right? And like from like junior high, high school, a lot of your curriculum and a lot of your focus is on these fields. And so you feel like it's kind of natural to go into these fields, right? So that goes back to like the student demand side. How do we like kind of move the needle from the cultural side? How do we incentivize students to go into these technical applied roles in STEM, in healthcare, in skilled trades, even? Because actually, when you look at the employment outcomes, the unemployment rate, the youth unemployment rate for age 15 to 24-year-old, which is like the primary age group where you just fresh out of college and fresh out of university and you're trying to land your first job. The youth unemployment rate is so high in this year. It's 13.8% in
Yeah.
2025. And actually, for college graduates, that youth unemployment rate is actually lower than university new grads.
Mm.
And that is very rare. Like after you don't see that very often since the late 1990s. And that's a new trend after the pandemic. And part of it is because of what we talked about, the labor market shortage in skilled trades and in nurses and so on and so forth, right? So these applied roles and roles in STEM major are actually like having a hard time filling these roles.
Mhm.
Whereas you have social science, arts, and humanity major new grads who are just struggling to find their first job, right? So
Right.
this mismatch is definitely partly can be contributed to cultural value or like drivers from the student demand side.
Right.
So yeah, I think what you said is quite on point.
Yeah, and you mentioned there a little bit about this, recent university graduate unemployment rate and how it's ticked up. One of the things that I've seen in this current job market is that quite a lot of entry-level jobs are asking for 2 to 5 years of experience. And I'm kind of curious if you believe that that also has an impact on unemployment rates.
Oh yes, definitely. I mean, you've mentioned something like a catch-22, dilemma, whereas I'm fresh out of school, I want to land my first job. Meanwhile, all of these entry-level job requirements, they already require some job experience, right? Which I
Right.
don't have. But if I don't have the job experience, how do I, land a job that can give me job experience, right? So
Hmm.
partly that's because of a very heated job market right now, right? So the competition is very heated. And therefore, for entry-level jobs, there might be competitions from people with a little bit of experience already. And that's why the companies are slowly and steadily trying to like raise their job requirement a little bit. So yeah, it's a tough job market as of now. It's a tough job market for university new grads, that's for sure.
Right. And you kind of brought up something, people often call it degree inflation, which is this idea of, people requiring higher and higher levels degrees or people who have, a bachelor's degree taking jobs that are traditionally more for people who only have a high school diploma.
Mhm.
In our current labor market, do you think that there's a way to deal with this form of underemployment?
I think you raise a very good question. For new grads that couldn't find job, what do you do? The first option is to settle, which is what we called underemployment. So basically, you go into a position where the job requirement is actually lower than your actual qualification, right?
Hmm.
Another route is to go up into higher education. So basically, if I can't find a job now, I'll just go into the master's degree. And
Hmm.
maybe in another 2 years or, 1 year, the job market will change and I have a better, education. So that's what you call partly the reason why we're seeing a degree inflation right
Hmm.
now. I think for the current labor market, to resolve that, that's a complicated issue that has, you have interplays from both sides, from the labor market side and from the labor demand side and from the supply side. And from the supply side, you have the student skill mismatch, which this op-ed was talking about. You have too many graduates from these low ROI majors or fields, whereas you have too few graduates from the high ROI or high labor demand majors. So you have this very weird mismatch when you have high unemployment and underemployment for some new grads, but in the meantime, jobs can't really fill their roles, right?
Hmm.
Companies can't fill their roles in some fields. So that's from the demand side. From the supply side, from the supply side. From the labor demand side, you have to look at the company and you have to look at the overall macroeconomic, fluctuations. As of now, people's like the investor confidence and the consumer confidence in our economy, Canadian economy, and global economy overall is very low, is very pessimistic, right? So investors are very cautious about investing in fundings, and therefore the new roles opening are very, in short stock.
Hmm.
So you have to look at it from both sides, and the conclusion is it is a tough job market for new grads, and the solution I don't know. We can
Hmm.
maybe start from trying to align the incentives, the funding incentives, to try to like fill this skill gap.
Okay. No, that's fair. And because you brought that up, this idea of, aligning the funding incentives, I'm curious, like, how do you think it would work for the government to track employment post-graduation and issue funds for schools after that information has been gathered? Do you think that there
Mhm.
might be a bit of a lag there, or yeah, are there any
Yes.
places where that's been done that you could kind of help point to?
Yes, definitely. I think it's definitely doable. It would require some fundamental systematic reform, but it's definitely doable. We now have the help of artificial intelligence and machine learning that helps you to track the most up-to-date high-frequency job postings data, which would give you a little bit of insight on how the job market is currently doing by different like fields and different sectors and occupations. So yeah, you're right. The data will be lagged, of course. But as of now, the majority, I would say 86%, I think around 86% of the provincial funding towards universities and colleges on average are based on historical levels, how much we give you last year, and enrollment numbers, right? And only 1 to 2% of that is performance based.
Mm.
And we can change that, right? We can partly change that. That's the current structure. So even though that the job market data could be a little bit lagged, we still have access to some most up-to-date job postings data and enrollment data and graduate outcomes. And we can link that with the performance of the graduates and the performance of the school, link that to the funding structure. I think that's a good way to start. And in terms of current examples, I believe that some Atlantic provinces are already experimenting with, like they are like earmarking a lot of these funding to colleges and universities
Mhm.
that's targeting healthcare because this is a very huge problem for Atlantic provinces, right? Because they have a aging population and their demand for healthcare, for nurses and for paramedics and so on and so forth are just, they're in dire demand, right? So what the government did is that they reacted to that challenge and they're like, okay, we're going to earmark this part of funding directly to colleges and applied colleges and polytechnics that are like producing or training graduates in these fields, right? I think that's an experiment that every provincial government should just take a look at and research into the eligibility and like if it's doable in your province. And, we could start from there.
No, that's really great because I was thinking about vocational schools, and it sounds like that's kind of where you think this kind of educational system should be leaning more towards.
Mhm.
So I'm wondering, do you think that like the unemployment, the ongoing youth unemployment and future labor needs could be best addressed by having more of this specific job training and sector training?
Um, Yes, I think partly that could be the area that we can work on. For starters, the current colleges and polytechnics who are responsible for mostly taking the role of training these applied talent, like talents with applied skills, they're receiving much less per capita funding from the provincial government than their university peers.
Mhm.
And if you think about it, a lot of these school programs, like STEM, construction, trades, healthcare, applied healthcare programs, they actually have a higher program on average program costs than a lot of these university programs because a lot of these university programs are lecture based.
Mhm.
And you don't like for these applied skill training programs, you need like labs and special equipments. And for nurses, you have to have these placement, right? You have the designated placements. So that's a lot of investment. That's a lot of cost to train a skilled tradesperson, to train a nurse, right?
Mhm.
So compare the cost with the funding that they're getting. No wonder that we're having a labor shortage, chronic labor shortage in skilled trades and nurses, right? So you're right. The weight and the funding allocation is currently putting colleges and polytechnics into a very weak position, whereas their role in solving this skill gap, this skill mismatch issue is critical.
Mhm. Well, Bochi, I want to thank you so much for your time. I think that this is going to be really informative for all of our viewers and listeners. Yeah, just thank you again.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's nice to talk with you, Matthew.
Awesome. This is Matthew on CJSF Radio 90.1 FM.